What motivates a company to implement ISO?
Its competitiveness, its reputation. It is reducing the time it takes to enter new markets. ISO is never a standard that is required. It is entirely a voluntary matter. Many organizations are afraid of ISO.
We want to convey that it's not scary.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Board of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin channel. Today our guests are Dmytro Kozlov and Oleksandr Moskal. Welcome, colleagues.
Welcome, colleagues.
Welcome. Hello.
As you probably know, Dmytro Kozlov is a member and chair of Supervisory and Advisory Boards, and Oleksandr Moskal is a business sustainability advisor. Today we will discuss issues related to processes and ISO. In the work of boards of directors, whether it is a supervisory board or an advisory board with additional powers, all the issues that are included in the agenda or in the board's work schedule are related either to the control and monitoring of the company's activities, or to the implementation and strengthening of the company's systematization, or to development and strategy. Today we are going to talk about implementing ISO because it is directly connected with the systematization of the company's operations.
And the first question is why this matters for board members, because we believe that it is important. It is important because they need to know what needs to be done so that a company, for example, can enter other markets or introduce products so that they can be sold in those markets. And for that reason, we invited our friend and colleague Oleksandr to briefly explain what ISO is and how it is implemented. And we want to convey that it is not something to be afraid of. It can be done with your own internal resources. It can be done by inviting experts such as Oleksandr or others.
Yes, and I would also like to add something regarding systematization. On the one hand, it is extremely important for entering new markets, for becoming a more reliable supplier for customers, and so on. On the other hand, it is also very useful and important for ensuring continuity in the management of the business, including enabling the owner to step away from managing the business if the owner is also the CEO, including for other matters as well, which are very important from the standpoint of the company's systematic operations.
Yes, I absolutely and wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment, and I will certainly try to elaborate on this specific point in more detail. For a vast majority of the major global corporate giants in the world today, it is fundamentally a matter of evaluating exactly how logical, convenient, and additionally profitable it truly is for these large companies to implement various international ISO standards.
At one point, I was a member of the board of directors of a company where ISO had been implemented, and all the issues related to systematization had, in effect, already been resolved automatically. The other question was how well the documented procedures actually worked, how regularly they were updated, and to what extent the picture created through the documentation of processes reflected the actual situation.
I would put it this way. ISO standardization is first and foremost about documenting procedures, processes, and everything else. But it is also a form of ongoing discipline within a company, because a standard is not issued once and for all. It is issued for a period of 3 years. And every year, a surveillance audit is conducted, while every 3 years you must undergo a recertification audit, which is not difficult to pass if everything is working properly and if there is evidence that the management system, regardless of which one we are talking about, for example, ISO 9001 for quality management, is functioning effectively within the organization, and there is evidence that management is involved, as well as evidence that all procedures are being updated and tested. So, in a way, it imposes a different level of discipline on the organization, which is not a bad thing and is not all that difficult. On the one hand, once a company has been certified to ISO, it is possible to lose the certificate, but of course nobody wants that. It disciplines everyone.
Oleksandr, based on your experience, what are the reasons and what is the motivation for a company to implement ISO?
ISO stands for the International Organization for Standardization. This is what it's all about. It is an independent, non-governmental international organization. It develops and publishes standards for a wide range of industries and sectors that help ensure the effective operation of organizations and promote consistency across products, services, and systems. On this slide, I have highlighted the key standards, the most widely adopted standards that organizations implement around the world. Probably the pioneer and, so to speak, the bestseller is ISO 9001, which is the quality management standard. These other ISO standards do not provide detailed explanations or specific requirements regarding the exact procedures for maintaining quality control, the specific methodologies that ought to be implemented, or which chemical components should be applied. It does not go into that. That is what a company's internal procedures are for, as well as national standards and the requirements of the relevant regulatory authorities, public health authorities, and so on. The ISO 9001 does not go into that at all. What it does say is that an organization must understand how to build procedures and processes that will ultimately guarantee the quality of the final product. Before we go further, let us take a couple of steps back and look at the history of the organization. This organization was established quite a long time ago in 1947 in Switzerland. It was created with the purpose of developing and adopting international standards that would facilitate international trade and cooperation. For example, if I know that you, my clients, are all certified to ISO 9001, then I know the level of quality I can expect from, or rather the level of quality you can expect from me as your supplier. And then if you sell my products to your own customers, you can also be confident that I have quality under control. Or for example, I am certified to ISO 45001, the occupational health and safety standard. That is, I am a manufacturer that cares about its people, that cares about cleanliness, that cares about safety, both for the people and for the products that are being manufactured, and so on. In other words, the organization was established after the Second World War, and that does not mean that no other standards existed. There are still a great many national standards in place today, and ISO does not come into conflict with them. ISO operates at a somewhat higher level. It does not regulate specific technical requirements. A national standard, on the other hand, may state that in order to manufacture automobiles in Poland, you must comply with certain specific requirements, whereas today, there are more than 20,000 standards covering different industries. They are updated continuously and follow their own review cycle, which is approximately every 5 years, although some are updated more frequently and others a little less often. But if you go to the ISO organization's website and want to purchase a particular standard, you can always check the status of that standard there. And if the status is above 60, it means that the standard will soon be under review. If the status is, say, 15%, it means that the standard is currently being revised and has not yet been released. In other words, the new version has not yet been implemented, so to speak.
And typically, how significant are the changes?
There are changes. They are. Let me give you an example. ISO 27001 is the information security standard. The previous version of the information security standard required business continuity for information security. That is, if your company has an information security function, it has its own servers, its own applications, its own people, its own scripts, everything needed to maintain control over information security. The requirement under the previous version of the standard was that your information security function, your information security department, had to have its own business continuity plan. But what if they are unable to operate? How are you going to ensure information security? The new standard says that your organization should have a business continuity management system and business continuity plans. That is, it is much broader. And although it may seem like a minor change, it is actually a significant one. And therefore, accordingly now, especially in the IT company market, it is very, very, very common for clients, for example, to require proof that the company processing their data has a certified 27001 standard and follows the changes being implemented.
Oleksandr, am I correct in understanding that ISO as an organization is not concerned with things like why different countries use different types of electrical outlets? That is not its role.
No.
Not at all.
ISO is more about how work is organized within a company. For example, if we are talking about quality management, ISO will tell you that top management must be involved and must understand the management system that is being implemented. They must at least approve and sign the policy under which it is implemented. That policy must be aligned with the organization's internal and external context. You can't come up with policy that is impossible to implement because you don't have the necessary departments or because you don't have the types of customers for whom it would be relevant. At the next level down, the procedures have to be developed. They have to be tested, reported on, and reviewed. Top management must regularly evaluate the effectiveness of a given management system. Again, taking ISO 9001 for quality management as an example. All of this has to function well, and if any shortcomings are identified, they have to be addressed, corrected, and improved. It is a standard that defines the level at which your company's operations should be organized. It is not about saying use this type of electrical outlet instead of that one. Those are matters that may be covered by national regulations, standards, or recommendations that should be taken into account, but they are not imposed by ISO.
Yes, you're right. It is more about how the quality control process should be organized. In other words, not what exactly has to be done, but how the process itself should be structured. Then you have to fill that structure with your own internal processes, procedures, controls, and so on.
All of those things already exist. They exist de facto. And that is exactly why it is unfortunate that so many organizations are afraid of ISO. Yes, auditors will come. Yes, you have to maintain ongoing oversight. Yes, you have to go through recertification. It is neither rocket science, first of all, nor is it prohibitively expensive, secondly. And thirdly, your organization already has all of these elements in place de facto. Unless, of course, the organization is so chaotic that nobody controls anything at all. In that case, the issue is not with ISO. But if the organization is operating properly, all the processes are documented, and the procedures have been implemented, then aligning everything with an ISO standard gives you the certification that shows you comply with a particular standard. And accordingly, that becomes part of your company's reputation. In many countries, there are national requirements. For example, in Poland, about a year ago, a national requirement regarding energy efficiency and energy management was introduced. And the government stated that organizations, especially those, must be able to demonstrate that they comply with those requirements. One way to demonstrate compliance with the national requirements is to become certified to ISO 5001. That is the energy management standard. ISO is never a standard that is mandatory. It is entirely a voluntary decision whether to implement it or not. In many countries, particularly larger ones, governments make it clear that if you choose this path, it is the approach they expect organizations to follow. In other words, there is no directive, and there cannot be one, requiring you to comply with any particular ISO standard. But if you want to be compliant with national requirements relating to, for example, occupational health and safety management, then ISO 45001 will help you achieve that. And so, through this process, de facto, certain industry standards and guidelines may appear to be strictly mandatory, despite the fact that they are not legally required. A company can say, we don't want to become certified, we will demonstrate compliance with the national standard in another way. That is perfectly acceptable, but the simplest path is the ISO route. Principles of development. Transparency consensus. ISO is a voluntary organization and it works through consultation. There are permanent members who develop the standards and work on them continuously, but they also consult with other experts. As a business continuity management expert and a member of the British Business Continuity Institute, for example, I often receive questions regarding ISO 22301, the business continuity management standard, asking, what do you think about this proposed change? So they actively seek input from experts. It is not simply a small group of people sitting together and writing new standards on their own. They consult with a broad community of experts and hold discussions. So when a standard is published, it is the result of substantial and large-scale brainstorming and collaboration. Naturally, all of this is done using scientific methods and modern technical solutions. Standards, as I have already mentioned, are a set of requirements, recommendations, procedures, and guidelines through which an organization can demonstrate the quality of its processes, as well as of its products and services for its customers. Pick up any standard and it begins by saying that the organization must understand its context. Who are its customers? What products do we manufacture? What national and international requirements apply to us? The external and internal environment must be analyzed. And only then does the organization decide, all right, if we align ourselves with a particular standard, we will most likely be able to meet all of those requirements. Of course, top management must be actively involved, not merely as the approver, the person who says, okay, fine, bring me the policy and I'll sign it. Top management must understand what it is all about. They must, of course, exercise oversight at their own level, not by walking around the production floor and taking product samples. No, they must monitor the effectiveness of the management system and continuously strive to improve any shortcomings that are identified, if any are identified. Planning, of course. The implementation of a standard must, first and foremost, be linked to the objectives the organization wants to achieve. Why are we doing this? Why are we implementing ISO 9001? Because we want to double our sales. We want to attract international clients. We want to enter markets where these standards have long been the norm and where no one can imagine buying products from a company that is not certified. So the organization's objectives must be evaluated and then top management decides how far it wants to go. After all, you can implement a standard in just a specific part of the organization. It does not have to cover every country in the world where I do business or every operation I have. I can choose a specific product line, or for example, a specific site and implement the standard there, and then my certification will state that the certification body has certified your facilities in Kharkiv and Mykolaiv that manufacture these particular products in accordance with ISO 9001, for example.
So it is possible to certify not the entire company, but only specific business areas or perhaps individual business units.
It all depends on the standard, but yes, it is fully scalable. For example, an organization may have 10 sites, and I may choose to certify only one of them for now. That site will have the certificate, while all the others will not. Even though they may follow exactly the same procedures and implementation practices, or you can certify everything at once. Support, operational support, and performance evaluation. I've already covered those topics, so I won't repeat myself. If our audience want to refresh their memory, they can look back at these slides to recall what we have discussed. But it is not enough simply to implement the standard. It's not enough simply to become certified. It has to be maintained on an ongoing basis. All the processes that are documented in the system must function. They must be monitored, reviewed, and improved if needed so.
And in general, continuous improvement is a very effective approach that can work alongside ISO, alongside Kaizen, and alongside many other management methodologies. So this is absolutely...
The typical model used by ISO is PDCA, plan, do, check, act. It is a model that can also be applied in any management system. You do not necessarily have to certify it. Yes, it is.
Also used in Lean Six Sigma.
Yes, it is used in many different fields, so I'm not telling you anything new here. Essentially, everything is built around the PDCA model. Simply put, we plan what we want to implement, we implement it, we verify the results, and we respond to any issues or shortcomings that have been identified, if any have been identified. This is where the most interesting part begins. We have discussed what ISO is, we have gone through the requirements of the standards, and now the question is, how do you become certified? First, you need to analyze the requirements of the standard you want to be certified against. Then conduct an internal audit. Ideally, you should conduct an internal audit. You can hire an external organization, but if your company already has an internal audit function, then it makes sense for them to carry it out, in accordance with the process and the standard you are seeking certification against. Perhaps something needs to be changed, or perhaps certain processes need to be documented. The internal audit will reveal all of those things. Next, we choose a certification body because compliance with ISO standards is certified by accredited organizations. One such organization is one that I work with. These accredited organizations are authorized to issue certificates confirming compliance with the standard, and they are also the ones who send their certification auditors. There are not that many of these organizations worldwide, but there are enough of them. Accordingly, a company can choose one or another depending on a variety of factors.
Oleksandr, what does that choice depend on? How to choose?
Well, for example, there is a very well-known German organization called TÜV. The vast majority of German companies choose TÜV. There is also PECB, the organization I work with. It is more widely recognized across the Americas, although not exclusively, because it also operates throughout Europe. You wouldn't want auditors from Germany flying all the way to Brazil to conduct an audit. Most likely, a company in Brazil would choose a certification body that is closer to them. There are also several certification bodies based in Cyprus, for example. Most European organizations typically choose to cooperate with this specific organization for several reasons. It is often a matter of complex logistics, or it could simply be about the overall cost involved, because it might frequently turn out that obtaining the exact same certification from a well-known body like TÜV will cost quite a bit more money than, for example, getting it from a smaller Cypriot organization. So, as they say, the choice is yours. But if you bring auditors from Canada to Ukraine, you will also have to cover the cost of their flights. Whereas, if there is a local representative office in Ukraine of an accredited certification body that is authorized to certify organizations' products and services, it may simply make more sense to work with them. Again, I am neither endorsing nor promoting any particular organization. I am simply saying that factors such as cost, proximity, and logistics are the primary considerations that influence the decision. After that, the certification body carries out a conformity assessment, and then the certificate is issued. If everything the auditors have assessed demonstrates that you comply with the standard, you will receive the certificate. The certificate is issued for a period of 3 years. 1 year after the certificate has been issued, the accredited certification body will initiate the process and ask you to arrange for what is known as a surveillance audit. Following the completion of that stage, approximately 1 year later, there will be a comprehensive pre-certification audit process. The surveillance audit can be conducted in an entirely remote manner, that is to say, through an online platform. However, for the audit conducted in preparation for recertification, the auditors will still, at least for a short period of time, come to the client's site. And then, in the third year, the recertification audit takes place. During the recertification audit, the auditors mainly confirm that all the processes are functioning properly, that all the procedures are up to date, and then the certificate is renewed. In the event that the version of the regulatory standard is updated, the organization maintains the full autonomy to determine for itself exactly when it wishes to undergo recertification recertification according to the requirements of the new version of the standard. But ISO works in such a way that you are given time to transition to a new version of the standard, and then after a certain period of time, I do not want to mention specific timeframes right now, the previous version of the standard is no longer considered valid. If you have not been recertified to the new version within a few years after the new version of the standard is released, your certificate becomes invalid because the previous version is no longer recognized. These regular recertifications every 3 years can be planned in such a way that a new version of the standard is released, and let's say it comes out 5 years after your previous certification. You complete your recertification and you are told you don't have to transition immediately, but you will move to the new certification cycle, meaning in the 3rd year. What can be certified? Products can be certified, services, management systems, management processes, procedures, and so on. So what exactly will be included in the certification depends, once again, on the organization's context, its requirements, its external environment, its customer base, and so forth.
But you mentioned that both the preparation for recertification and the recertification audit itself require the certification body to physically visit the company's facilities. But what should you do, for example, now when there is a war in Ukraine and not many people are willing to travel, especially from international companies?
I'll be honest, I don't think such an audit cannot be conducted remotely. And now, a significant number of these highly respected and accredited organizations are actively designing and developing their own sophisticated platforms for conducting comprehensive remote auditing and digital inspections. In other words, I don't think that if we're dealing with a force majeure situation and need to undergo recertification and the auditors cannot travel, they can't conduct the audit remotely. But under normal standard circumstances, it generally requires the auditor to come on site, meet with the management, meet with the people responsible for specific procedures, standards, and so on. But I think it's not a problem to reach a reasonable arrangement.
Based on your professional experience, I was also wondering if a company plans to implement one of the ISO standards. Is it required for there to be a specific responsible person who takes charge of organizing the process within the company?
Thank you for this question. I was just on the verge of discussing this very topic right now. I consistently suggest and recommend the specific approach that I have outlined here. Learning the standard is not that difficult. There are training programs, and if anyone is interested, I can help personally. And my recommendation is this: always train an internal auditor for the ISO standard you want to be certified against, as well as an internal implementer, a lead implementer, and a lead auditor. Have at least 2 people. That will already be sufficient, depending on the size of the organization, of course, but at a minimum, at least 2. One person to help implement the standard, and the other to conduct the internal audit and say, in my opinion, we're ready. As a result, this will reduce the time required for the certification audit, because when the certification body assigns its auditors, they conduct interviews with different departments, and so on, with different functions. Whereas if they already have a person who led the implementation, they will spend a day with that person. They already know which documents the auditors will request, they know where to find them, and so on. They know how to answer the auditor's questions. The auditor is happy as well, because that person brings exactly the procedures and exactly the documents the auditor requests. They understand. That person understands what is being discussed. As a result, it shortens the audit. After all, the auditor's working hours also cost the organization money. Accordingly, if instead of 5 days you complete the audit in 2, because you've already invested in a person who helped with the implementation, who has already prepared the entire set of documents, so the auditor simply reviews a sample and prepares the report, everything becomes much easier. That's what I recommend now. Train someone from within your own organization, because the organization has no understanding of the standard but wants it. They've heard that clients require it. Clients are asking for 27,001. Let's hire an external consultant. They'll come in and put everything in place. They will come in and put everything in place. Yes, they will. But it's better to train your own people. It's better to train someone internally and have that person on board who will help all the other departments implement the standard. We'll report that we're ready, while a second person will verify it and say, yes, we really are ready. And they will work with the auditors, which makes the whole process much easier for us.
So, in conjunction with the process of implementing ISO, a dedicated entity such as a project office or an ISO office is typically established as well. Am I understanding this correctly, or is it not quite like that?
That would make sense if the organization is implementing several standards and it's a large organization. In that case, you could establish a PMO or a dedicated office. Otherwise, you can simply choose someone who is closest to the area. Well, I don't know, if we're implementing a quality management standard, I wouldn't look for someone who has to learn everything from scratch. For ISO 9001, for example, I wouldn't choose someone from finance. I'd probably select someone from production or the quality department from quality control, and I would train that person. If we're talking about information security, then it could also be someone from the HR department. The best candidate for training in such a standard would be someone like that. On the contrary, I'd go to the information security department, find someone who already works there and whose normal working day consists of the responsibilities listed in their job description, but they also know what that ISO standard is. And then, when we're preparing for certification, that person works on the project. During that period, they devote more time to the preparation, and once the certificate has been obtained, they return to their regular responsibilities and continue working. So I would say that this person can simply combine certification, recertification, and surveillance audits with their day-to-day responsibilities. What do audits actually look like? An external audit is conducted by an accredited organization. You can also arrange for an external audit. If you don't have an internal audit function, you can arrange for a pre-certification audit to verify whether the organization is ready. Then the auditors from the accredited certification body you selected come in and conduct the certification audit. These can be combined. The same organization can first conduct your pre-assessment audit and then come back to perform the certification audit. The only thing that cannot be combined is this. The company or organization that implemented or helped implement the standard cannot then audit it. That is prohibited under ISO principles. In other words, if I implemented the standard at your organization, I cannot conduct the audit. No, I can conduct the pre-assessment audit because that's our joint effort. I helped the client prepare, carried out the pre-assessment audit, although that's also questionable. Well, from an auditing practice perspective, it's generally viewed unfavorably. If I was involved in the implementation, someone else should perform the audit, but with certification, that's not allowed. If I helped implement the standard and prepared the organization for certification, I cannot. Even if I were accredited to do so, I cannot conduct the certification audit.
It's completely logical, and the same principle applies in other areas of responsibility. The person responsible for implementation cannot also be responsible for oversight of what they themselves implemented.
So there's nothing new here. There's the surveillance audit, which I've already mentioned, and then the recertification audit. Why implement standards? Well, first of all, it's about competitiveness, reputation, easier access to new markets, the organization's image, greater trust in the organization, and often process optimization, because an organization may have a whole collection of procedures with new ones being added year after year. Then the ISO framework comes in and says, no, these are the procedures we actually need. These are the key ones. They must be kept up to date and they must work. Everything else is just noise. Every organization will see some positive impact from implementing ISO. For a small business, it's about attracting customers and increasing trust. For a medium-sized business, it can also be, in addition to attracting customers, it can be about process optimization because the processes may be overly complex and the standard helps streamline them. For large organizations, it's also about international reputation and company-wide standardization because many multinational corporations have business units that all operate differently with their own procedures and their own approach to processes. As a result, standardization and alignment across such organizations help, first of all, bring order. Second, simplify processes, and third, ultimately achieve certification and obtain a certificate for the entire organization. To summarize, as I wrote there, standards are an important tool for ensuring the quality of processes. There's really nothing in that statement to argue with. Does it actually make sense? Since I haven't worked with the standards, that question never came up. Secondly, they support business growth, enhance your image, and create new opportunities.
Oleksandr, what languages are the standards available in? Is there an official Ukrainian version, for example?
All standards are available in English without exception. Many of them are also available in French, Spanish, and Ukrainian. I can check, but they certainly are, although not all of them. So it depends on the specific standard the client is asking about. You need to check the relevant standard on the ISO website, whether a Ukrainian version is available. If you want to purchase the document, it typically costs around $100, more or less.
You mean access to the standards? Yes, it's paid.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you see, you actually have to purchase it directly from the ISO organization. Well, I suppose they have to make their money somehow or another, right? But it's not an enormous expense. If we're talking about training courses, those are also paid. If you attend a training course, you may not even need to buy the standard because the course provides a thorough and in-depth understanding of the standard's requirements. So purchasing it isn't strictly necessary. Still, my recommendation is that if a company is moving towards certification, it should have the standard, it should own that document because first, it will help develop an internal training program, and second, it will support discussions with the auditor. The auditor will come with a copy of the standard. They'll say, well, clause 18.1 states this and that. Even though if I don't even know what clause 18.1 says, then it's difficult to have a meaningful discussion. On the other hand, if both the auditor and I have the standard in front of us, we can simply discuss the interpretation of that clause. So this is how I interpret it, and here is the evidence that I've implemented it. You interpret it differently. Let's discuss it.
Oleksandr, one more question. If we're talking about Kaizen or Lean Six Sigma, those approaches are typically embedded in the corporate culture. To what extent does ISO also need to be embedded in the corporate culture?
Here, common sense speaks for itself. If we're talking about having a set of procedures that must actually work, having evidence that they work, and demonstrating that top management is involved, and if we meet those requirements, then we comply with the standard. So, in practice, the standard becomes embedded in the life of the organization because our processes are established, they function, and therefore we comply with the standard. But quite often, organizations also formalize this as part of their corporate policy, stating that a particular standard has been implemented and that all employees are required to follow certain rules, or, at the very least, comply with specific requirements. I've seen that very often. Corporate policies stating that since we are certified, we must maintain that certification and continue to be recertified because it's a requirement of our clients, and everyone in the organization is expected to understand that.
What is the cost of implementing an ISO standard? Because, as you mentioned, it can be implemented at different levels across the entire organization or at the level of a business unit or department, but are there any general benchmarks for estimating the cost of implementation?
Roughly speaking, Oleksandr.
Even a rough estimate. Well, look, let's put it this way. Exactly which specific standard are we talking about here?
Well, for example, ISO 9001.
No, I'd say which standard it is probably matters the least. They're very similar. They all have the same structure and the same core requirements. Only the subject matter differs. Quality, occupational health and safety, energy management, business continuity, and so on. So the implementation cost is generally comparable. If the same organization, for example, wants to become certified against two standards, the implementation cost will be roughly the same, but there are many variables involved. Who needs to be involved from the organization side? Those people will need to dedicate some of their time, and someone else may have to cover their regular responsibilities. Will we be training those people on the standard? If so, how many of them will there be? Which accredited certification body will we choose? What is their pricing policy? So it's quite difficult to give you an idea of the cost, but it's not astronomical.
Let me ask it another way. Based on your experience implementing, let's say, any standard you like, how long can the process take?
Well, the preparation will probably take several months. The people involved may not be working on it full time, but preparing everything, writing the procedures if they don't already exist, or reviewing and updating them to align with the standard and so on, will probably take several months. The audit itself depends on the size of the organization, of course. It may take 1 day or 3 days, depending on the scope. And then what? Well, a year later, there's the surveillance audit, and you'll probably need to spend a few weeks beforehand reviewing the documentation. Are the workload and resource requirements ever so significant that you need of 50 people? No, this can be done within people's regular job responsibilities. It's just a few additional tasks.
A few €1,000, that's what it might cost.
I think so, yes? Yes, again, it depends on the scope and on who will be carrying out the certification, but no, we're certainly not talking about millions.
We mentioned that there are many benefits to it, including, for example, the overall systematization of everything related to management specialties and continuous improvement and so on. That is certainly a very positive development. But many business owners and stakeholders, with every single step they take and with every new implementation they oversee, they truly want to see ROI that emerge during the implementation process. Are there any real-world cases that could be used as detailed examples for us today?
Look, there are cases such as IT companies that provide services to clients, for example, call centers or hotline support. There are companies that act as call centers on behalf of major market players. I had a client that served as a call center for Microsoft customers. Microsoft simply said, these are our requirements. You must have ISO 27001 and ISO 22301. That's it. If you don't have those certifications, they won't sign a contract with you. That's it. So that's a very straightforward case. But if no one requires it, and we simply want to do it for the company's reputation, or we're entering a market where all the competitors already have such a certificate, then every CEO has to weigh the decision. Do I need it? Is it recognized? Is it required? If not, then what value will it bring? Will I find more clients? How much will certification increase the company's revenue? In every case, you have to do the analysis. It's difficult to say, get certified, and tomorrow you'll have 10% more clients. I wouldn't promise that to anyone. Maybe someone will get an 80% increase while someone else won't see any changes at all. Although, well, I wouldn't be that pessimistic because, after all, certification is at the very least an image component for you, especially if your product bears the mark. Thank you. According to ISO, this changes the end customer's attitude toward the product.
Oleksandr, Dmytro, thank you very much for a very interesting conversation and for the useful insights related to ISO and to the systematic approach in general. I think we will find a time, if you don't mind, to invite company owners who have implemented ISO or perhaps members of the boards of directors of such companies so that we can talk with them about the nuances that arose during implementation and about the practical side of this implementation.
Sergiy, we are really grateful.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. And see you at the meeting with practitioners.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. See you on the board of directors with Sergiy Bulavin channel.